It was January 1959, the dead of winter in the Soviet Union. The Ural Mountains, cold, vast, and unforgiving, stretched endlessly across the landscape, their snow-capped peaks and dense forests creating both beauty and danger. Into this frozen wilderness, a group of 10 young adventurers set out on what was supposed to be the journey of a lifetime, a trek that would earn them the highest certification in Soviet hiking, known as Category 3. Leading them was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Dyatlov was not just a skilled leader. He was meticulous, organized, and respected by his peers. He was the kind of person who could fix anything, build anything, and inspire confidence even in the harshest of conditions. Under his leadership, 9 other hikers, all students or recent graduates, eagerly joined the expedition. They were strong, intelligent, and full of life. Each had experience in outdoor survival, and together they made a team that seemed unstoppable. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women: Igor Dyatlov himself, Zenaida Kolmogorova, Yuri Doroshenko, Rustem Slobodin, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Yuri Krivonischenko, Nikolai Tibau-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest member who joined at the last moment. There was also another hiker, Yuri Yudin, who would start the journey but later be forced to turn back due to illness, an illness that would unknowingly save his life. Their destination was a remote peak in the northern Urals, known to the indigenous Mansi people as Kholat Sa, the Mountain of the Dead. The name alone carried an eerie weight, but to the hikers it was just another challenge, another adventure to conquer. On January 23rd, they boarded a train from Sverdlovsk, laughing, joking, and writing in their journals. Some even carried cameras, capturing moments that would later become haunting relics of a trip that ended in tragedy. As the days passed, their trek grew more difficult. They traveled by train, truck, and even horse-drawn sleds before reaching the last outpost of civilization, a small logging village called Vizhai. Here they rested, prepared their gear, and shared one last meal in warmth before heading into the wilderness. The people who saw them remembered them as cheerful, optimistic, and full of energy. No one could have imagined what lay ahead. From Vizhai, the hikers began their ascent into the mountains. They carried heavy packs filled with food, tents, skis, and supplies for the long journey. The snow was deep, the winds harsh, but spirits remained high. They sang songs, took photos, and wrote detailed diary entries about their experiences. Dyatlov himself made sure everything was well documented, from their route to their meals. On January 28th, just a few days into the expedition, Yuri Yudin fell ill. His joints ached, and he could barely keep up with the group. After much discussion, he made the difficult decision to return home. He hugged his friends goodbye, unaware that this would be the last time anyone would see them alive. Yudin later described the moment as bittersweet. He was disappointed to leave the adventure, but in hindsight, he knew it was the choice that saved him. Now the group was down to 9. Together they pushed deeper into the mountains, battling snowstorms and freezing winds. By February 1st, they reached the slopes of Kholat Sa. Here, Dyatlov made a fateful decision. Instead of taking a safer path through the valley, the group set up camp directly on the exposed mountainside. Perhaps it was for training purposes, or maybe they wanted to save time. It remains a mystery. They pitched their single large tent, anchored it against the harsh wind, and prepared for the night. What none of them knew was that this would be their final camp. The evening of February 1st, 1959, was bitterly cold in the Ural Mountains. Winds howled across the slopes of Coldest, carrying with them an icy bite that could cut through even the thickest layers of clothing. At an altitude of over 3,600 feet, visibility was low, and the snow fell heavily, blanketing the mountain in white silence. The 9 hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, had just finished setting up their tent on the open slope. It wasn't the safest place. Flat ground in the valley below would have been better protected from the wind. But for reasons that remain debated to this day, Dyatlov chose to make camp on the mountainside itself. Some experts suggest it was to train in harsh conditions, while others believe they simply ran out of daylight. Whatever the reason, this decision would forever be tied to their fate. Inside the large canvas tent, the group tried to create some semblance of warmth and comfort. They laid out their sleeping bags, hung wet clothes to dry, and prepared a simple meal. Diaries later recovered show that spirits were still high. They joked, sang, and even snapped photographs, frozen smiles in the middle of an unforgiving wilderness. There was no sense of fear, no hint of the nightmare that was about to unfold. At some point in the night, however, something went terribly wrong. Investigators would later find the tent slashed open from the inside, as if the hikers had cut their way out in a desperate attempt to escape. What could have driven 9 experienced hikers to flee their only shelter in sub-zero temperatures, without coats, boots, or even proper clothing? That single question has haunted this case for decades. What followed, according to the evidence, was chaos. Footprints discovered later in the snow showed that the hikers ran down the slope toward the tree line, some barefoot, others wearing only socks. They were not running in all directions, but together, as if fleeing from something inside or outside the tent. The prints were calm at first, walking rather than sprinting, but grew more scattered the further they went. Roughly a mile down the slope, near the edge of the forest, investigators would later find the first grim evidence of what happened. At the base of a large cedar tree, 2 of the hikers, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonisenko, were found dead, stripped to their underwear, with signs of burned skin and branches broken high above, as if they had tried desperately to climb for safety, or perhaps to see back up the mountain. A small fire had been lit nearby, a final attempt at survival in the freezing cold. Not far away, 3 more bodies were discovered: Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their position suggested they had been trying to crawl back toward the tent. Dyatlov lay face up, hands clutching the snow. Zina was found with her face toward the mountain, as if determined to return to camp. Rustem's skull bore a small fracture, though not one immediately fatal. All 3 had died from hypothermia. It wasn't until 2 months later, when the snow melted, that the final 4 hikers were found deeper in the forest, in a ravine. Their deaths raised even more disturbing questions. Ludmila Dubinina had severe chest fractures and was missing her tongue. Thibaut Brignol had a crushed skull. Zolotaryev also suffered chest injuries described as comparable to the force of a car crash. And yet, there were no external wounds, no signs of struggle, no evidence of weapons. How could such injuries occur without leaving a trace on the outside of the body? Why were some of the hikers wearing pieces of clothing stripped from the others, as if they had shared garments in their final moments? And why had they abandoned the safety of their tent in the first place? That night, something unimaginable happened on the slopes of Coldest. Whether it was a natural disaster, a human threat, or something stranger, the hikers' desperate flight into the snow left behind a trail of evidence that has puzzled investigators for over 60 years. What should have been just another night of survival for these experienced mountaineers instead became one of the most enduring mysteries in modern history. When the Dyatlov group failed to return on schedule, friends and family quickly raised alarm. At first, authorities hesitated. It wasn't unusual for expeditions to be delayed by bad weather, but as days turned into weeks, worry grew unbearable. On February 20th, 1959, official search teams were finally dispatched into the icy expanse of the northern Urals. Volunteers, students, and even military personnel joined the hunt. The first breakthrough came on February 26th. A search team stumbled upon the group's tent, partially buried in snow on the slope of Kholat Syakh. What they found was chilling. The tent was collapsed, its sides slashed open from the inside. Personal belongings, boots, coats, food, diaries, and cameras were all left behind. It looked as if the hikers had fled in the middle of the night without taking anything essential for survival. For the searchers, this discovery raised more questions than answers. Why would trained mountaineers abandon their only protection against the elements? Following the tracks left in the snow, the searchers descended toward the forest below. It was there, under the branches of a towering cedar tree, that the first bodies were found, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonichenko. The young men were barefoot, dressed only in their underwear. Nearby, remnants of a small fire smoldered, evidence of a desperate attempt to stay warm. Broken branches high up in the tree suggested they had tried to climb, perhaps for shelter or to see back toward their camp. Their bodies showed strange signs, burns on their skin, bloody mouths, as if they had suffered far more than just cold. Roughly 300 meters away, searchers discovered 3 more victims: Igor Dyatlov, the leader, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustin Slobodin. They were positioned as though they had been trying to crawl back to their tent. Igor lay on his back, fists clenched, face turned toward the slope. Zina was further ahead, her expression frozen with determination, as if she had tried to force her body to keep going despite the freezing winds. Rustam's body bore a small skull fracture, though experts later determined it wouldn't have been immediately fatal. Hypothermia was listed as the cause of death for all 3. By now, the recovery team had found 5 hikers. 4 were still missing. The search intensified, but the brutal winter slowed progress. It wasn't until May, 3 months later, when the snow finally thawed, that the remaining 4 bodies were discovered in a ravine deeper in the forest. This discovery shocked investigators. The conditions of these bodies were far different from the first 5. Ludmila Dubinina had devastating chest fractures and was missing her tongue. Nikolai Thibault-Briganol's skull was crushed, while Alexander Zolotaryov suffered catastrophic chest injuries. Alexander Kolevathov had fewer injuries but still showed strange signs. The medical examiner compared the internal trauma to that of a car crash, yet their skin bore no external wounds to match such force. Even stranger, the 4 were dressed in pieces of clothing taken from their friends. Some wore pants or coats cut from the dead, as if they had shared garments in a final effort to survive the freezing night. Tests on their clothing later revealed faint traces of radiation, an inexplicable detail that would fuel conspiracy theories for decades. The exact sequence of events that led to this tragedy has never been established. Why were the hikers separated in 2 groups? Why did some have horrific injuries while others simply froze? Why had they abandoned the tent at all? For the searchers, one thing was clear. Whatever had driven the Dyatlov hikers from their shelter had been sudden, terrifying, and powerful enough to cause complete disarray.
In the frozen silence of the Urals, the grim discoveries only deepened the mystery. The tragedy of those 9 young hikers wasn't just the loss of life, it was the haunting evidence they left behind, a puzzle that refused to fit together.
The grim recovery of the hikers' bodies left Soviet investigators with more questions than answers. From the very beginning, the official inquiry was clouded by confusion, secrecy, and the strange, contradictory evidence gathered from the scene. When investigators examined the hikers' tent, they were baffled. The cuts made from the inside suggested the group had slashed their way out, as though escaping an immediate threat. Their boots, coats, and essential gear remained neatly laid out, untouched. For experienced mountaineers, leaving without such protection was unthinkable, unless something had terrified them enough to abandon all logic. The autopsies only deepened the mystery. 5 of the hikers had died from hypothermia, but 4 showed catastrophic internal injuries: crushed ribs, fractured skulls, massive internal bleeding. Strangely, their skin had little external damage, as if the force had come from inside their bodies. Forensic doctors compared it to the aftermath of a high-speed accident or a blast wave. And then there was Ludmila Dubinina's missing tongue, which only fueled macabre speculation. Soon after, whispers began to circulate. Locals speculated about a secret military experiment gone wrong. Others suggested the hikers had stumbled upon classified weapons testing. At the time, the Soviet Union was in the midst of the Cold War, and secrecy was paramount. The faint traces of radiation found on some of the hikers' clothes added fuel to this theory. Could they have wandered into the aftermath of a chemical or nuclear test? Officials never confirmed, but many suspected the government knew more than it revealed. Another theory was avalanche. Soviet investigators themselves leaned toward this explanation at first, suggesting the hikers had heard, or imagined, the roar of snow shifting above them. In a panic, they may have fled into the night, only to become separated, lost, and fatally exposed. Yet experts argued the evidence did not fit. There were no signs of a large avalanche at the site, and the tent remained partially standing. Even decades later, the avalanche theory remained both the simplest and the most disputed explanation. There were also suggestions of human involvement. Some whispered about Mansi tribespeople, the indigenous reindeer herders of the region, attacking the hikers for trespassing. But the investigators quickly ruled this out. There were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, and the Mansi were known to be peaceful. Still, rumors persisted that someone, perhaps strangers, perhaps even Soviet military personnel, had forced the hikers to their deaths. In the tense climate of 1959, conspiracy theories grew rapidly. Some claimed the hikers were caught in a secret parachute mine test, where bombs dropped silently from the sky exploded above ground, creating concussive forces similar to their injuries. Others suggested they had witnessed something they were never meant to see: strange lights in the sky, perhaps rockets or flares from military experiments. Indeed, several locals reported seeing glowing orbs above the mountains around the time of the tragedy. Despite the mounting speculation, the official investigation abruptly closed in May 1959, just months after the hikers were found. The final statement was vague. The hikers had died due to a compelling natural force. That phrase, cryptic and unsatisfying, only fueled decades of suspicion. What natural force could crush ribs like a car accident, strip a young woman of her tongue, and scatter 9 trained hikers across a frozen slope in the dead of night? For years, the case was quietly buried in Soviet archives, whispered about, but rarely discussed openly. Families were left with grief and no answers. The mystery seemed destined to fade into silence. And yet,
the Dyatlov Pass incident refused to be forgotten. As decades passed, the Dyatlov Pass incident refused to fade into obscurity. Instead, it evolved into one of the most studied, debated, and mythologized mysteries of the 20th century. The fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s finally allowed the case files to resurface, sparking a wave of new research, documentaries, and international fascination. With modern science on their side, researchers began revisiting the tragedy, attempting to separate myth from reality. One of the most enduring explanations was still the avalanche theory. For years, critics dismissed it because the site showed little evidence of a massive slide. But in 2021, a groundbreaking scientific paper breathed new life into the idea. Inspired by advanced avalanche simulations and even snow mechanics developed for the movie Frozen, Swiss scientists proposed that a delayed slab avalanche could explain much of the mystery. According to this model, under specific wind and snow conditions, a heavy slab of snow could have shifted hours after the hikers pitched their tent. When it slid down, even modestly, it could have exerted massive pressure, crushing ribs and fracturing skulls while leaving little surface evidence. Terrified, the group may have fled half-dressed into the night, succumbing to exposure. This explanation, while still debated, remains one of the most scientifically grounded to date. Another modern angle focuses on katabatic winds, powerful, sudden gusts of freezing air that sweep down mountainsides. These winds can reach hurricane-like force, disorienting anyone in their path. If the hikers were hit by such winds, their tent may have collapsed or seemed at risk of being torn apart. In the chaos, they might have cut their way out and fled in confusion, some sustaining injuries in the brutal conditions. This theory aligns with the hikers' experience levels. They knew how deadly winds could be and may have acted rashly in desperation. Some researchers have also explored the possibility of infrasound, a phenomenon where low-frequency sound waves caused by wind interacting with the mountain can create physical and psychological distress. At certain frequencies, infrasound is known to induce panic, dizziness, and even feelings of dread. Scientists suggest the unique geography of Dyatlov Pass could have generated this effect, spurring the hikers into a sudden, irrational flight from their tent. While it doesn't explain the severe injuries, it provides a chilling possible motive for their bizarre behavior. Of course, radiation remains one of the most controversial clues. The fact that some of the hikers' clothing contained higher than normal radiation levels has fueled conspiracy theories of nuclear testing or espionage. However, modern scientists suggest a more mundane explanation. Several of the hikers, including Krivonishenko and Kolovatov, had previously worked in industries related to nuclear materials. Their clothing may have carried contamination long before the expedition. Still, for those inclined to see cover-ups in every shadow, the radiation detail keeps the mystery alive. The idea of military involvement continues to resonate with many. Some believe the hikers accidentally stumbled into a secret Soviet weapons test, perhaps involving parachute mines, radiation experiments, or chemical agents. The unusual injuries, massive internal trauma with little external damage, fit the kind of concussive force produced by explosions. Local witnesses reporting strange fireballs or glowing orbs in the sky that night only add to the suspicion. Yet modern forensic reviews point out inconsistencies. If an explosion occurred nearby, there should have been burns, blast debris, or more evidence on the site. Then there's the chilling possibility of human attack. Could someone else have been on the mountain that night? Over time, DNA testing has largely ruled out the involvement of the local Mansi, who were wrongfully suspected early on. But some suggest other intruders, escaped prisoners, Rival hikers or even KGB operatives may have forced the group out of their tent. The lack of defensive wounds or footprints, however, make this hard to sustain. In recent years, cutting-edge forensic reconstructions have shed more light. CT scans of the hikers' skulls and rib cages confirmed the extraordinary nature of their injuries, comparable to high-speed car crashes. This lends credibility to both avalanche and parachute mine theories. Meanwhile, computer models of snow accumulation show that Dyatlov Pass, while appearing relatively flat, can indeed produce delayed snowslides under rare conditions. The avalanche hypothesis, once dismissed, has gained new respect among scientists. Yet, even with modern explanations, mysteries remain. Why were the hikers' clothes swapped among them in bizarre ways? Why were some of their bodies discovered months later, buried deeper in snow, as if they had survived longer than others? And why did officials close the case with the vague phrase, compelling natural force, rather than naming a specific cause? These unanswered questions ensure the debate will never fully settle. For some, modern science provides closure. The Dyatlov hikers were tragically caught in a rare natural disaster, amplified by fear, cold, and darkness. For others, the rational explanations fall short of the eerie details that make this case so haunting. Whether one believes in avalanches, infrasound, secret weapons, or something far stranger, the Dyatlov Pass incident endures, precisely because it resists a single, neat conclusion.
More than 60 years have passed since 9 young hikers lost their lives in the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains, yet the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to haunt imaginations across the world. It is more than just an unsolved mystery. It has become a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of humanity's struggle to make sense of tragedy when the answers seemed forever out of reach. In Russia, the case holds a special place in collective memory. The name Dyatlov Pass itself is a permanent reminder of Igor Dyatlov, the expedition's determined leader. Monuments stand in the Ural Mountains near the site where hikers and tourists still trek to honor the memory of the 9. For locals, the story carries both sorrow and reverence, a reminder of the dangers of the mountains, but also of the bravery of those who dared to challenge them. Each year, new expeditions are organized to retrace the group's final journey, blending memorial with investigation, as if walking the same path might unlock long-guarded secrets. Internationally, the incident has become one of the most studied unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Books, documentaries, podcasts, and films have all attempted to reconstruct what happened on that fateful night. From Hollywood thrillers inspired by the case to investigative journalism pieces that dissect every clue, the story has captured audiences in a way few other mysteries ever could. In many ways, the Dyatlov Pass has become shorthand for the inexplicable, invoked alongside names like Bermuda Triangle and Roswell. The fascination lies not just in what we know, but in what we will likely never know. Part of its enduring legacy is how it blends fact with folklore. The hiker's torn tent, the bare footprints in snow, the bizarre injuries, all are real, documented evidence. Yet over decades, these details have been stitched into myths of glowing orbs, secret military plots, and supernatural forces. Each retelling bends slightly, reshaped by cultural fears of the time. In the Cold War years, suspicion naturally fell on Soviet secrecy and nuclear testing. In the modern era, scientific theories of avalanches and infrasound dominate the debate. The Dyatlov Pass story adapts, reflecting the anxieties of every generation. For the families of the victims, the legacy is more personal and painful. Parents and siblings fought for decades to learn the truth, often battling indifference or secrecy from officials. Some relatives believed until their last days that their children were victims of a government cover-up.
Others held fast to the idea of a natural tragedy. What united them all was the absence of closure. To lose a loved one is devastating, but to lose them in such bizarre, unexplained circumstances creates a wound that never fully heals. Modern investigators and journalists often reflect on what the Dyatlov Pass incident represents in the bigger picture. It is a stark reminder of how nature itself can be mysterious and terrifying, even without conspiracies or supernatural explanations. Mountains, snow, and wind, forces that seem familiar, can align in rare, deadly ways. At the same time, the case reflects our deep human need for answers. When confronted with tragedy that defies simple explanation, we construct theories, stories, and myths to fill the silence. The Dyatlov Pass is less about one definitive truth and more about the endless search for it. The legacy also lives on in academia and science. The avalanche model, presented in 2021, was not just a scientific paper. It became an example of how modern research and even pop culture, Frozen's snow animation software, could help reframe historical mysteries. It showed that mysteries from the past can still teach us today, pushing technology and science forward in unexpected ways. Yet perhaps the most enduring element of the Dyatlov story is its atmosphere of the uncanny. Unlike other tragedies, there's no single obvious explanation, no single villain, no clear accident, no definitive evidence. Everything seems slightly off. The cut tent, the missing shoes, the radiation, the fractured bones, the staggered way bodies were found. It is this strangeness that keeps the story alive, sparking endless debate on forums, in documentaries, and around campfires. In the end, the Dyatlov Pass incident is more than an unsolved case. It is a mirror reflecting our deepest fears and curiosities. It asks questions about the limits of human survival, the power of nature, and the secrets that might always remain just beyond our grasp. Whether one believes in avalanches, secret weapons, or something unearthly, the story endures because it straddles the line between science and mystery, fact and legend. As the icy winds continued to sweep across the Ural Mountains, the site of the tragedy remains eerily silent. Visitors who stand there today describe a haunting sense of stillness, as though the mountain itself remembers what happened that night. The Dyatlov hikers are gone, but their story remains immortal, etched not only into the snow and stone of the Urals, but into the imagination of the entire world. Their legacy is one of courage, mystery, and the eternal human search for truth in the face of the unknown.